Hello, this is Chris Ott, and I'm continuing with this series, What Mayor Baba Really Taught. This is part 10, and the topic here is um, the way that I was taught what Baba taught by my father. And the way I taught my daughter is the same way. And I want to say why this is a really, really good way to teach a child Baba's divine theme in a way that they can understand it and it'll stick. And it shapes everything that happens after that in their education. And without it, I don't see how people, well, it's why people don't understand Baba, because they don't have this. But my parents heard of Baba when I was 4. And my father kind of, I was like his little protege. Like, he liked to tell me everything he learned as fast as he heard it. He wanted me to know. So I was like his confidant at a very young age. And when I was 5, sometimes my mother would put me and my sister to bed, but sometimes my dad would come in and tell me a story. And the story he told me was Mayor Baba's Divine Theme when I was 5 years old, more than once. And when my daughter was about 4, I told her in a slightly more embellished way exactly the same story. And I'm going to do this now. I'm going to actually go over it. And I actually plan to teach my grandson this, and Megan has given me permission to film that if we do that. So I want to leave a record of this because I find people don't understand Baba, and if, like I said, this was one of the advantages that I had. Okay, now where did this story come from? Well, when I was 5, my father told me the story a couple times at my bedside, and I've remembered it to this day. And when I was about 50, I was reading a book, Stay with God, by a disciple of Mayor Baba's, Francis Brabazon, an Australian poet. And I recognized the story in the book, Stay with God. And so I called my mother, who was still alive at the time, and I asked her if they were reading Stay with God when I was 5. And she said, yeah, when we went over to the Rileys, who told them about Baba, on Monday nights, that's the book we were reading. And so I realized that's where my father got this story. He didn't make it up. It comes from, and now Stay with God was written 3 years after the original publication of Baba's major book, God Speaks, and Baba asked Brabazon to write the book on the theme of God Speaks. So it's totally appropriate that you would find an encapsulated poetic version of the theme of creation by Baba in this book. Now, I was going to give the page number. Okay, in Stay with God, the 1990 third edition, it's on the bottom of page 71. That's where the story begins. It's a much more elaborate there and sophisticated, but Dad told me the version I'm about to tell you. All right, now, with my daughter, when she was about 4, we got on the couch, and I used to have this poster, which I actually have right here, over here, which I'm going to be using to tell the story, on my wall. It didn't have glass over it at the time. It just had cardboard behind it and was in a really cheap frame. But it was given to me by a friend, Mark Riney. And I don't know where you can find these. This is the chart that's in Baba's book, God Speaks, and it's called the Divine Theme, or the it's also called the sad, I can't remember the name. The train of life, well, I can't remember. But anyway, the divine theme is one of the names of this chart. The advancing stream of life. It's also called that. There's a book by that name, compiled after Baba died, and this chart is on the front of the book, or a piece of it. So that's one of the names of this illustration. Now, the illustration is by Ron Gailey, an American disciple of Baba who was an illustrator. and a painter. And they have the original, I guess, either in India or California with the Sufis who owned the copyright to God Speaks. And it was the Sufis. Well, I won't go on. That's enough. That's enough. Okay, let me tell how I told my daughter. I hope this won't outrage some people, but this she and I were kind of like me and my dad. She was my little protege, and it was a relationship that we both found fun. Okay, I'm going to show. I took the poster off the wall. We were on the couch. She was 4 years old, 5 years old. And I flipped it around to the cardboard side, and I drew the following picture first before I began to tell her the divine theme, to explain the poster on the wall that was always over our couch. And it still remains over my couch here in Myrtle Beach, this version I'm going to use. But I've had it reframed. Okay, so the first thing I told her is I said, first let me tell you what other people think, like what Christians think of the world, so that you'll know how it's different, how what I'm going to tell you is different. So they believe that there's like God, okay, and I drew, there's God with a beard, and God, he, here's his hand, and then he created the world, the earth, and we're on the earth. This is kind of Genesis. And then he put people on it, so we got people, and put Adam and Eve. And they had children, and they went on and had more children. And besides the God and his world that he made, there's also somewhere out there's a devil. So I draw the devil, And then besides them, there's also these angels, And then there's stars, and then there's heaven, and somewhere there's hell. So what you begin to see is there's a lot of things. The God's just one of the things, and he gradually created all these other things, or they always existed. I don't know. It ends up like this. It's a pluralism, but I didn't use that word with her. I just wanted her to see that everything's separate. Okay, in our story, it's real different. Okay, now I'm going to intercut these two cameras together to hopefully depict the story I'm telling, and I hope the microphone will do okay. All right. Okay, because I have to turn this way. Hopefully I won't have bad sound. Okay, I think that'll be okay. All right. That's what I told her. Now, this is the creation of the world. I'm going to explain the story. In the beginning, there was just this dark area, this dark circle. And it's God. Okay, that it really means God, but God didn't have a body or anything. And God was deeply asleep. Okay? And that's called the beyond state of God. And then this blue area is where he started to wake up. Okay? And once he woke up, he had this whim, this desire to know who he was. And he asked, who am I? And so the first thought came to him and says, I know I'm gas. I mean, like air. And then for millions of years, he was just gas and air. And then I think I said rocks. I know I'm a rock. And so for millions of years, there were all kinds of rocks. And God was very happy that he was a rock, because now he knew who he was. But after millions of years, God got tired of being a rock. And he said, I'm not a rock. Who am I? And he asked the question again. And the second time he answered, I know I'm metal. And so then for millions of years, God was so happy he was metal, and he was thought he was every kind of metal. And then, but after millions of years, he got kind of tired of that, kind of bored. And he said, I'm not metal. What am I? I know, I'm plants. And so then he was all kinds of plants. So let's look what kind of plants he was. And we would look and we would point to the plants and we'd say what they were like. There's a carrot. God thought he was a carrot. And so there were carrots. And then, because he was dreaming this, okay, it's this dream, he's trying to realize who he is. And then we go through each of these phases, what's called worm, what Baba calls worm, insect, and reptile here in the chart, and then there's fish. But we would name the things and go, and there's a turtle, and there's a frog. Kids like to do that. I didn't have this chart when I was a kid. My dad was blind. He just told me the story. But, you picture it in your mind. And then so I used this chart so we could make it a fun thing where we both participated. And then we pointed to all the different fish. We named the different fish. God thought he was this fish, and God thought he was that fish. And then we went over the birds, and we did the same thing. For millions of years, God thought he was a bird, and I thought he was every kind of bird. And then we would find these different birds. There's a crow, and there's a duck, and there's a swan, and there's and there was a what do you call those big beautiful ones with the eyes on their feathers? I forget. But anyway, then we go through the mammals. But then, after a long time, he said, "I'm not an animal. I know. I'm a man or a woman. I'm a person." And so then he tried to be every kind of person, and he thought he was this, and there's a pilgrim, and then there's a lady, and there's a Chinese guy, and then there's like a lumberjack, and and then she said, "I'm the ballerina." And I said, "Yeah, you're the ballerina, and I'm the cowboy." And she said, "No, Dad, because there's a cowboy right here, see?" She said, "No, you're him." I was Reggie, because I was the sage, because I was telling the story. So a kid really respects a parent who's telling him about how the world formed. And what kind of parents do that? They don't. They leave it to the world for the kids to get confused. But I was doing it when she's little, and she trusts me. And I said, "No, I'm not him, but I'm him. I'm her." That's actually a picture of Rano Gailey, but she did herself very androgynous, so it represents the man or woman who's ready to launch on the spiritual path. And that probably is more like me, a person who's already been a king and a princess and a cowboy. But so I identify with this character who's just a gross plain person who's maybe ready for the path. But then, after we discussed how we were all these different things, we then point to the first plane. He said, but then God said, "Oh, I know." Then he was still a person, but he got on the first plane, and then he smelled all these smells. She told me recently this was the boring part, but we would go through these planes. And by the way, Rano Gailey asked Baba, "How do I depict the planes?" And Baba said, "Well, just do your best." So she came up with what is there. And then we get to the fourth plane, and he had all these powers, see? And then then he's on the fifth plane, and he's all mind, and then he's the sixth plane, and he's all feeling, and then he sees God. But the next thing is he realizes, "I know I'm not a man. I'm God." And then he became God, which he always really was. And then he was happy forever. That's the story, the creation of the world. Okay, that's that. Now, I also want to point out some things about this chart and the value of this chart that aren't immediately obvious. And they weren't even obvious to me until I gave it a lot of thought recently, getting ready for this talk. That little children's story, which is not from a children's story, by the way, it's from Stay With God by Francis Brabazon, a Sufi poet. But that story has so many things in it that most people don't get that Baba teaches. And I'm going to go over what they are. There are points that are made just by going through that, and you don't have to say them. They come through with it. The first is, it is God who plays all the roles of all the things in creation, from evolution to humanity to the planes, then the yogis and the saints, and even that is finally God realized. Everyone, it's like a play. If God, all the world is a play, is a stage. Well, if that's true, God plays every part. All right? It's not a bunch of souls. It's all the one soul. The one soul of here. That blue soul that's playing all these people, the oversoul. Okay. The next, now here's some quotes that say that. That is Paramatma. That means, para in Sanskrit means supreme, and Atma means soul. So Paramatma obviously means supreme soul. It's the same thing as depicted here in blue in the chart. It is Paramatma that speaks through the mouth of one and listens to the ears of another. That's in the intelligence notebooks, which I'm going to link to from my book so that people can find where I have a version of it that's free. Or God is that one playing innumerable roles. That's in Stay with God. No, that's in STW. What does that stand for? Anyway, can't remember. It's in Baba's writing. The next thing, the next thing that comes through this chart. So the one is that God is the only protagonist, really. It's not, God isn't separate like remember, in this depiction. See, God is separate. There's God and there's the things he creates. Now, Baba says he doesn't create the world. Now, I'll go over that again. Baba said, who says God has created the world? We created it by our imagination. And that's what we just saw. Okay? That's Lord Maher, the original print edition, 1986 edition, page 4097. And Baba says, when we say he has created this illusion, we lower him and his infinity. So it's not a compliment to say that he created. See, he didn't really create anything. It's all himself. It's just his imagination. You don't really create your dream. You dream it. And it's never anything apart from you because it doesn't really exist. It's a dream. This is an important dream, however. Okay. And then you also get from this story that death is not real, and we don't fear death. Why should we fear death? There's a line in God Speaks, and it's a quote. It's quoting the Perfect Master Rumi. It's in God Speaks, second edition, page 33. I died as mineral. This is what you get from the chart, but I'm quoting God Speaks. I died as mineral and became a plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Isn't that great? Well, that's what you don't have to explain to a child if they hear this story. They get it. That death is not anything. That's where you get to find out what's behind the curtain for the next phase of the journey. You also get that reincarnation is not a transmigration of the soul, as I said earlier in one of the other parts. This actually says this in The God-Man, a biography of Baba, that proved by Baba in I think 1963. And anyway, this is from the page number is from the 2010 second edition, second printing, page 422. It says, reincarnation is not transmigration of souls, which in its crude form is fantasy. See, transmigration of soul is that inside bodies there are souls, and then that migrates to another body. That's not what Baba teaches. He teaches that there's only one soul, and it doesn't migrate anywhere because it's not in the illusion. Just like when you lay on the bed and you're having a dream. You're not in the dream. The dream's not even really in you. The dream is, after all, just a dream. So the idea that there's these souls in the dream, in bodies, but he said that's crude fantasy. Okay. He said, it's crude form of fantasy. No, wait, excuse me. He said, which in its crude form is fantasy. I'm sorry. Um, the next thing that we find in this chart is that all this is God's dream. We, in fact, are God having the dream. That's what a lot of people don't get. This is what Bob is teaching. The next one is only God exists. And where's the devil? We don't have a devil. That's not a thing. The devil is just a construct for explaining things that are evil that happen. And Baba has other ways of explaining evil in his discourse on good and evil, which we won't go into. So, but the next thing you learn is that what evolving consciousness means. You know, I have a friend who's in her 70s, and she doesn't know what consciousness is. But at least she's honest. What's consciousness? You know, you can't buy it at Walmart. What could it possibly be? You know, those are the things that are real. So anyway, she doesn't know what it is. That's fine. Consciousness is a kind of diaphanous word. What does it mean? But when you go through the chart and you get it that a turtle is more something than a plant, and that each one of these things, and that a mammal is more so than a bird. And what is that? Well, you get it right away. You don't even need a word for it. It's that it's more aware. This is the evolution of consciousness that Baba talks about. And I'm really saddened that a lot of people don't know that. They think that God is consciousness. No. If God were consciousness, then there couldn't be a state of God prior to consciousness, which is the original state, proving that you can have God and no consciousness. But God does have the capacity for consciousness. So now, so we get it that we are all part of the advancing stream of life, which is a holistic idea. So you know, it all works together. It's not a patchwork or hodgepodge of concepts. It's all one concept, the advancing stream of life. And that is the creation of the world. That's the theme. That's the purpose of reality. The purpose of reality is to go from unconscious divinity, which is here, and then evolve to conscious divinity, which is when he becomes God realized he's consciously divine. And that's the whole theme. And that you don't have to say those hard words. It's all in this, okay? So, and then we get the idea that we're all one. You know, you hear we're all one, and it's used as a slogan sometimes. But what does it mean? You know, we're all stardust? Well, maybe our bodies have some stardust in them. I don't know, but that's not what the universe is. The stardust is just part of the dream. We're all one dreamer. There's only one protagonist. We're not going to become gods like some people have thought they were mystics. We all are God. There's only God. And as I like to say, there is no God, there's only God. Because the idea that there is God kind of imagines that idea that there's this thing out there that's God. And that's not what Baba teaches. He teaches that there's only God. Okay, so I want to say that I've told this story before. It's in a video that's on YouTube called Teach Your Children Well. But people don't see the value of it. They don't get it. They just think, well, Chris is an odd guy. He talks funny. And one person thought that this is a myth. No. A myth is where you have characters. Like, you know, there was Thor, and then he did something. That's a myth. No, this isn't a myth. It's literal. Originally, God was asleep. That's not a myth. I didn't say originally Thor was asleep or, you know, Hercules. God. This is the facts by Baba, I believe. He's saying it as it is in simple few terms. But it's not a myth. That's not what Francis Brabazon was writing when he wrote Stay with God, when Baba asked him to write a book on the theme of God Speaks. He was trying to write in a poetic way, but and to make it juicy and interesting and to cover the theme from different angles. But he was never writing a myth. Plato wrote myths, not Brabazon. So that's important. And I also want to say, I hope people can see what a beautiful world this would be if this teaching by Baba became how we saw the world. Because we see that our enemy is ourself, and our enemy is God. God isn't just in our enemy, he is. There isn't anyone else for him to be. So that's the real reason for cooperation and love and harmony and in a world of brotherhood. It's an understanding that's like this, that where it's literally so, where there's a story that can make it make sense, even to a child that's 5 years old. And I want to say, my daughter does not have any of the confusions that other people have. She also never went and took drugs. She never became promiscuous. She never had to do any of that. She's a mom. She takes care of her kid in Arkansas. She lives with near her friends, and she's very happy. And I recently visited her. I should throw up a picture of me with my lovely daughter. And I would say that Megan does not suffer from the kind of existential crisis that a lot of people these days do. Like, what gender am I? What am I doing here? What's the point of life? Suicidal ideations. I don't either. I get miserable and I get depressed, but I don't have any crisis about what life is. I get it, what life is. I once asked Megan, I said, so many of the kids that grew up with Mayor Baba following parents left. In fact, a great majority, probably 90%. They were not, but they weren't really taught what Baba taught. They went away, they heard a lot of other ideas, and because they were never taught anything, their parents had no idea what Baba taught. Like I said at the beginning of this, I've literally heard Mayor Baba followers say that Mayor Baba had no teaching. There was no teaching, so they taught nothing. But I wanted to add a little piece at the end because right there I forgot my point. And then while I was editing just now, I remembered what it was. So I was saying that a lot of people, they don't stay with Baba if they grow up in a Baba family. They wander away. Of course, they've never really had Baba explain to them. Their parents never had parents that explained him to them. And they don't really understand him. As I said at the beginning of this, a lot of them think that he didn't have any teachings. And as you can see, he had quite a lot. And they're interesting. And they're different. Very different. And they're not the things that the Baba people think that they're kind of making things up because they just don't know what he taught. So, about 10 years ago, I asked my daughter, I said, why do you follow Baba? And because I was curious, what would she say? And she said, because it makes sense. That's the point of this video. So that story, as funny as it sounds, and as whimsical as it sounds, Baba says the universe is the result of a whim by God. It makes sense, and it makes life make sense. And once you hear that story, if you're little enough, when you hear that we were seeded by aliens, you'll laugh. And that the world, here's a story, in the beginning there was nothing, and then it exploded. That's the Big Bang Theory. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. So, so I wanted to add that, is that this story has so much value. And I want to add one more thing. When you're a little kid, you pretend to be things. That's when you play with dolls. And you pretend to be your doll. And you personify that doll. And you are that doll when you're playing with it. I remember. I played with G.I. Joes. And my sister played with Barbies. And we used to play together. We would have these adventures, and her girlfriend would come over. We'd put a big salad bowl in the middle of the room, and we'd go down the Amazon. We'd see it all in our minds. So when you tell a child this story, that God thought he was a giraffe or a peacock, and then he was so happy, and for a long time, he was a peacock. It totally actually makes sense. It's as strange as it sounds. This Baba's reincarnation is entirely intuitive to a kid. Transmigration of the soul, that's just macabre, as C.B. Purdom said in his book, The God Man. That's just a macabre piece of imagination, the theosophical reincarnation. That's not Baba's teaching. Baba's teaching is the one I just gave, and I gave it in a kind of whimsical, fun way, but there's 100 ways you can give it. And I'll give it some other ways as I get on with this. Because remember, I'm not going to leave a stone unturned. This is my whole 2 cents. And anyway, that's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much. And I'll see you in part 11. And take care till then. Bye-bye.